Chapter 49. Caleb thrust his head out of the window of his chamber. The rain soaked him, but he didn't care. He felt like he could fly. Alsalon quivered behind him, clutching a gladiolus to his chest. Caleb's tears mixed with the rain. "We won!" The crown prince spun to find himself facing a mirror. It was the same one he'd stared into before the battle, but it looked different now. He scanned his reflection and thought he looked a little older. Not in any physical signs, but in other aspects, like the way he stood straighter. "We should call this the Battle of Gladioli Fields," his brother proposed. Caleb couldn't fight a smile. "Much better than the Battle of the Pansies, which is what gladioli are." A knock echoed. Caleb hesitated, but the door pushed open anyway. He exhaled as Jacob entered, holding a hand behind him. "You survived!" he exclaimed. The knight grinned. "It'll have to be something worse than a Kelin to take me down. I have something that is yours." He brought the crown of Indaleria round from behind his back. Caleb felt his breath seize in his throat. He took it by his fingertips and held it up. "Where did you find it?" "In the treasure vault of Darkrain, Sir Prince. Although accidentally, to be honest." Fighting tears, the prince could only nod. "Put it on," Alsalon suggested. He also smiled, and it was the first real smile that Caleb had seen on his face since the garden. He glided across the floor and placed the crown on the windowsill instead. He shook his head. "No, I'm not—" Jacob coughed into his hand. "Regardless, you should meet your guards. It is not wise for you to be alone." Caleb scowled. "I respect your advice, Captain, but I am exhausted of everyone telling me to do that." The knight did not duck his eyes, but he kept his lips together. "You are in command." Caleb turned back to the window. "And, as one of the ranking members of your order here, I'm certain you are needed in the field." The knight bellowed a laugh. "They've got it well in hand. But I can take a hint." He bowed to each prince and then pulled the door open. Amthros spilled into the room and tumbled over the knight captain's leg. His features had shed their colors. Jacob rushed to stand between the fallen knight and Caleb. Alsalon also darted forward, but Jacob snagged him by the shoulder. Caleb stuck out his hand. "No, my good captain. I want a word with him." "Go ahead." Jacob stared at the other knight without moving. The prince frowned. "I strongly suspect that those duties on the field must be urgent. Not as urgent as they were half an hour ago." Amthros crawled to the wall and propped himself up against it. He groaned. Alsalon covered his mouth with both hands. "He looks like the Walking Dead." "Because he is." The older prince's glare hardened. Jacob towered over the knight of Indaleria. "What do you want here?" Amthros seemed to choke on his own gasps. "I was told Silver Dawn was a day out." "You were told wrong. Same with the number of warriors and supplies you saw in this castle." Amthros swayed as he tried to push himself up. He muttered through cracked lips. You haven't had victory yet. Still time for justice, at least." "Justice?" Alsalon repeated. Jacob suddenly straightened. "Where's Eve? Lady Evelyn?" Caleb replied, "She sealed all the paths to Darkrain up in the tower." "She's by herself?" The knight captain rose to the balls of his feet. "Go to her," Caleb offered, letting a hand rest on his sword. "This man can do us no harm." The captain looked between the prince and the door. "Captain," Jacob bolted. Amthros pressed a hand against his chest and wheezed. "Did you poison me?" His wizened voice barely bled through the air. Caleb squatted in front of him. "No, that would mean we put something in. We took something out." The knight fought to speak, but the confusion on his face was enough to ask the question. Your water of life. Lady Evelyn used it as the key when she locked away Darkreign. To open any path between our worlds now, one must have your water of life, wherever it has gone to in our great circle of a world. He sighed. Your death will be far easier than what you gave many other good people. I don't know if there is an afterlife, but if you fail to discover oblivion, may your soul get what you deserve. Amthros wetted his lips with his tongue. But the traitor said, Farallon. Caleb watched him as he spoke. To save his own life. You were right there. You could have denied Thistle's words. You even tried to kill him before we escaped on the river. He later told us the truth, that it was you who betrayed us. Before the raid? Amthros rolled his head. Yes. Caleb ground his teeth. It was you who truly marked the king and queen for death. Alsalon shrieked. Our parents! Our parents, you murderer! He threw himself at the dying elf, his fists pounding. Caleb hauled him backward. Alsalon, no. He's already dying. The younger prince's voice had to fight through his sobs. But he's why they're gone forever. And we took his life for it. Get back! Caleb flung his brother across the room by his waist. A sound emanated from between the knight's lips like paper crackling in a fire. He was laughing. Yes, I am a murderer. I have been for a long time. What do you mean? Caleb whispered. The children. The Storm Reader children we held as prisoners. The prince narrowed his brow in thought. Do you mean the Storm Reader children that my father spared in Dari? You were defending yourselves. Amthros trembled. Didn't matter. They were children. We needed to pay for that sin. I needed to pay it. So you betrayed your own to an even worse evil. The knight shook his head. Didn't know what to do. They... wicked. But so were we. There was no balance. Caleb pursed his lips and tightened his fists. You could have killed me and my brother whenever you wished. Wasn't your sin. Ah, even though the Kemen wanted to kill us anyway. We had to pay for our crimes. I begged you not to come here. Caleb exhaled and straightened. Well, in all this mess, we have you to thank for our victory. Amthros creased his brow. We couldn't have brought the Kemen here without you. You were an invaluable source of information to them. We couldn't strike back against their scattered forces, and they had free run of the kingdom. If you hadn't told them that we were going to be here, they would have destroyed many, many more innocent lives. Because I told them. The prince nodded. Yes. He stepped back. But that just wouldn't be convincing enough. They needed to discover for themselves as well. He felt a smirk drawing across his face, and he couldn't imagine why when he was boiling with anger underneath. So that's why Dare and Kelin told them too. Why they went on the raid. 2 humans mixed in this chaos who had become pets of the Crown Prince and who had been previously tortured by the Kemen. He felt his face tighten. Well, the Storm Readers would believe how easily they could give up some priceless information they accidentally learned. Caleb leaned forward. And then there is the matter of Thistle. A Kemen, supposedly married to an elf, with a half-breed son. But I'm certain his information was also believable to them in the end. After all, there are no Kemen traitors. The knight's head tipped forward. You knew all along. Yes, and we gave them exactly what they yearned for. Dis and Vlade needed to come here, didn't they? That being said, I gave orders to let as many Kemen as possible flee back to Darkreign. I am not like them. Amthros gurgled. Caleb rocked back on his heels. The knight's voice seemed to come from a long way away, and his eyes no longer focused. It's all right now. I think we've paid our debt. My sin no longer weighs. He closed his eyes and exhaled for the last time. Derora Saxen! Dare stopped at Kelin's shout. She breathed out. They'd made it back. He didn't jump at her, and instead remained sitting at the table. He looked exhausted. He, Thalin, Boyson, and Striggle had made themselves at home in a dining hall full of empty tables. Thistle followed her into the room. "Dad!" Thalin hopped up and latched onto Thistle's leg. The Kelin rested a hand on the child's head. Dare grinned, still holding her sword. "Palins," Boyson wheezed. He pointed at her. "Palins!" He stared as if she had stolen it from his own hand. Kelin slid right off the bench and onto the floor in surprise. "A Palin sword? What? How?" Balin shook his head, and his eyes narrowed in confusion. "Nuh-uh, the Black Hound—" He must not have found this one. Dare pulled the weapon close to her chest. Because it disappeared before he destroyed the Empire. Probably. "Carrick!" Striggle stepped forward, searching. "What Carrick? What Carrick?" "Where's Carrick?" Dare blinked. She glanced back through the door. "He's right here." The other dwarf tiptoed around the corner, his eyes studying the floor intensely. His beard ended in a straight line below his chin. Boyson and Striggle choked and broke into suspicious coughing fits. Carrick bunched up his face, turning cherry red beneath his skewed spectacles, and burst into tears. The other two dwarves ran up to him and began to share his sobs. Dare opened her mouth, but never got the chance to speak. Kelin blurred in her vision as he leaped from the floor and yanked her sideways. He saved her life. A sword whistled through the air where she had been standing. Vlade screamed like a wounded Calvar and kept stabbing at them. Kelin and Dare stumbled behind a table. The dwarves fought to untangle themselves. The Kemen's sword caught Boyson across his face, slicing through his nose and into his skull. The dwarf jerked to a stop, dead. Vlade yanked his blade free and wheeled back on Dare and Kelin. Dare shoved Kelin to the side with her shoulder, bringing the Palin's sword on guard. The Kemen paused, staring at the sword with a curious expression. "Thistle!" Dare hollered. "Thistle!" Carrick and Striggle pawed at Boyson's body. She heard one of them wailing in anguish. Vlade seemed to hesitate as he locked his gaze onto Thistle. His head dropped toward Thistle's sword and then to the boy quivering behind him. The point of his sword dipped. "There are no Kelin traitors." Then he said, "I knew it, Vlade. I knew it. Your sword proves it. But this is impossible, this. No, you've—" Dare and Thistle lunged at the same time. The sound surrounding them deadened as Thistle's sword moved. Vlade slipped out of the reach of their weapons. He backed away from their onslaught, his sword strong and fast enough to counter both of theirs. Thistle moved his blade higher and higher against the commander's chest. "Stay low," he hissed. Dare realized his plan. If she attacked low on the Kemen's body, then she would force his blade to be level with hers. She'd seen it in Silver Dawn's formation. Vlade would also have to defend high at the same time. She struck for his thighs, going as low as she dared without opening herself to an attack too much. Thistle thrust at Vlade's neck, but the commander's sword was in time to parry everything. Thistle pressed his attack faster. Dare strained to keep pace. She moved as rapidly as she could, but she couldn't match their speed. Vlade's sword found an opening and licked along her arm. She thrust ahead and felt her sword pierce his clothing, but it caught on nothing substantial. Thalin slipped around and lunged with one of his knives at the back of Vlade's legs. The long knife went deep into the back of Vlade's thigh. The Kemen commander's sword swung around behind him and messed the top of the boy's hair. Carrick, Striggle, and Kelin brought up their weapons and advanced. But before they got close, Vlade rolled forward, smashing past Thistle and Dare. She swung at his back, but he was already up and running. He was too fast and had gained several table lengths despite his limp. She leaped into the chase, but her foot caught against a table leg and she fell onto the floor so hard that her chin split open. Thistle hopped over her to continue the pursuit, but Fallon shrieked, feeling the top of his head. His hair was shorter in some places. His father nearly dropped his sword as he ran back to the boy. He swept up his son in his free arm. Kelin raced across the dining hall. Carrick scrambled to the other door, shouting, "Alarm! Raise the alarm!" Kelin had reached the other end of the room and stopped. "He's gone! I don't know which way!" "Doesn't matter," Thistle snapped. "Raise the alarm." Dare grimaced and her hand fumbled to stop the blood on her chin. "We gotta find Caleb,"